In an era marked by opulence and military might, a sudden death shook the core of a kingdom. The passing of King Uzziah wasn't just the end of a monarch, it was the unraveling of a nation's illusion of stability. As fear swelled among the people, a solitary figure entered the sanctuary in search of clarity. This man Isaiah was about to witness something so overwhelming it would redefine his identity forever. While others mourned the king's death, Isaiah encountered the Lord's throne. Elevated far above earthly rulers, the temple trembled not from footsteps but from the voice of the Almighty. Majestic beings hovered above, radiant yet concealed, declaring an unshakable truth. They sang not to be heard, but to reveal a holiness that no flesh could endure. Sacred, 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 they echoed, not once but thrice, as if to express something beyond language. The entire expanse of creation was declared saturated with divine brilliance. In that instant, Isaiah was not inspired, he was undone. Every sense of personal righteousness crumbled like ashes in the presence of flawless light. His confession was raw, unfiltered, his lips unclean, his surroundings defiled, his gaze undeserving. He had come seeking comfort, but instead found confrontation with the absolute. One celestial figure approached with a burning ember, its glow too pure for human touch. The coal brushed his mouth, not to injure but to restore, signaling a new beginning. The declaration came softly but surely, guilt removed, shame erased. It was not just a cleansing, it was a commissioning. A voice echoed, resonant yet searching, "Who will I send?" It was not merely a question but a call, one that pierced deeper than any command. Isaiah's reply was not rehearsed. It erupted from a heart scorched by divine reality. "I'm here, send me." He offered himself, not from boldness but from broken surrender. Yet the assignment wasn't triumphal. He would preach to deaf ears and speak to blind hearts, a messenger to a people unwilling to listen. How long, he asked, how long must futility endure? The answer was grim, until cities were ruins and fields lay desolate, until only traces of life remained. But even in devastation, a flicker of grace endured. A stump would survive the fire, and from its core new life would someday sprout. This vision wasn't symbolic theater, it was divine summons wrapped in awe. It tore apart illusions of control and revealed a world trembling beneath the weight of real holiness. The fall of a king may shake the palace, but the unveiling of God shakes the soul. That contrast between human pride and divine purity defines the prophetic life. Isaiah wasn't chosen for eloquence or political savvy. He was chosen because he had seen, and having seen, could never be the same again. What he saw didn't entertain, it exposed, it stripped his assumptions bare, and clothed him with commission. This sacred encounter was not for Isaiah's glory, but for God's message to shine through flawed humanity. The vision was not a reward, it was an initiation. Divine glory didn't ask for Isaiah's credentials, it demanded his availability. The prophet's call began not with influence but with inner surrender. The altar fire cleansed what years of ritual never could. Each element of the vision, throne, angels, fire, voice, disclosed one thing: God's presence is never casual. It is thunder wrapped in stillness, fire cloaked in mercy. When Isaiah walked into that temple, he expected tradition. Instead, he met the eternal. The message he carried from that moment on wasn't shaped by public opinion. It was forged in the heat of holy confrontation. He would no longer speak from imagination or intellect. His lips now belonged to the one who had purified them. The task ahead would be thankless. His words would fall like seeds on stone. But Isaiah knew something deeper than outcomes. He had seen the one who reigns beyond all outcomes. Even when hearts were hardened and ears turned away, he would speak not to persuade but to testify. His voice would carry heaven's echo. That vision ensured Isaiah never mistook national power for divine authority. Kings rise and fall, but the Lord's throne remains untouched. The smoke that filled the sanctuary was not a symbol, it was real. It veiled and revealed simultaneously, concealing glory while declaring its nearness. Isaiah didn't leave that temple more confident. He left terrified and transformed. He no longer belonged to himself. His message would not be his own. And though his path would often lead through rejection, his purpose remained unmoved, for the one who called him had first consumed him. This encounter teaches us that true calling begins in brokenness. It is born when pride shatters and wonder takes its place. The vision Isaiah received isn't just a story, it's an invitation to those who dare to see beyond the visible. In a world intoxicated by power, Isaiah beheld the eternal King, and he found that real glory never boasts, it humbles. Many seek signs and wonders, but few endure the fire of revelation. Isaiah did, and in doing so he became fire himself. When a nation lost its king, Isaiah found his, not in a palace, but on a throne high and lifted up. In the end, the man who saw heaven didn't ascend. He descended into a mission that cost him everything. But he had already counted the cost the moment he said, "Here am I." As threats gathered on the borders, Judah faced more than political tension. It faced a test of trust. The armies of neighboring kings aligned, pressing their claim with ruthless ambition. King Ahaz stood at a crossroads, surrounded by fear and crippled by doubt. Rather than seek divine wisdom, he turned toward earthly alliances. The northern kingdom of Israel had joined forces with Syria, intending to topple Judah's throne, their plan to install a puppet ruler and erase Ahaz's dynasty. Rather than calling upon the Most High, the king courted a pagan superpower. He viewed Assyria not as danger, but as deliverance. Isaiah was dispatched to meet this trembling monarch, standing by the city's aqueduct with his young son in tow. The child's name, a prophecy itself, reminded the nation that only a faithful remnant would survive. The prophet came with a calm yet firm assurance. "Do not let their fury shake you," he declared, referring to the hostile kings as extinguished embers. Isaiah warned that panic breeds poor choices. Trusting an empire would cost Judah more than any invading army ever could. He extended an open offer: ask for any sign from heaven or the depths below. But Ahaz, cloaked in false piety, refused even to request proof. What appeared humble was actually hardened resistance. The king didn't want confirmation. He feared conviction. Isaiah's tone shifted, no longer pleading but pronouncing, "You've wearied men, must you also test the patience of God?" Yet mercy still extended its hand. A miraculous promise broke through the doubt. A child would be born to a virgin, and his name would declare God's presence. Emmanuel, Isaiah announced, not as a concept, but as a coming reality. God himself would dwell among the people. This birth was more than symbolism. It was divine strategy, a long-range plan that would stretch across centuries. Though the child's arrival would outlive Ahaz, its timing would eclipse his failures. God's plan would move forward, regardless of human reluctance. Isaiah foretold that before the boy could discern right from wrong, the two threatening kingdoms would be demolished. Syria and Israel would soon vanish under the weight of Assyria's vengeance. But instead of relief, Isaiah saw impending sorrow. Because Ahaz chose politics over providence, the empire he embraced would become Judah's oppressor. Assyria would not come merely as an ally. It would arrive as a whip in God's hand. The invaders would flood the land like a relentless river, overwhelming everything in their path. Even the sacred soil of Judah would feel the crush of foreign boots. Still, Isaiah's message carried layers: immediate crisis, long-term consequences, and distant redemption. His words held both warning and wonder. God's word did not tremble with the king's knees. It stood unmoved, declaring both accountability and assurance. Despite Ahaz's stubbornness, the divine timeline advanced. The covenant was not dependent on one man's choices. Through Isaiah, heaven pulled back the curtain of time, revealing that God's rescue would come in unexpected form. A child, small, vulnerable, yet destined to rule with justice. The prophet described him with striking clarity. Not a military hero, but a child who would bear divine names. Authority would rest not on his shoulders through conquest, but through peace. The people, wandering in spiritual darkness, would see an unquenchable light. Hope would not come from war horses or treaties, but from a cradle. This promise didn't erase Judah's coming troubles, but it cast them within a greater plan of redemption. The irony was painful. While kings negotiated survival, God promised salvation, but few had ears willing to hear it. The prophetic vision was not confined to palaces or council chambers. It reached into the fabric of time, stitching together rebellion, rescue, and revelation. Isaiah spoke not only to Ahaz's era, but to every generation that forgets where real strength lies. His voice carried more than rebuke. It bore divine insight. Judah's enemies would fall, but Judah would also be humbled. Trust misplaced becomes judgment invited. Assyria's rise was no accident. It was allowed. God permitted its strength not to reward it, but to awaken his people. Isaiah's words carried paradox. The hand they trusted would soon crush them. Even then, the prophet never stopped planting seeds of hope. He knew that divine discipline was never without design. There would be pain, but not annihilation. God always reserves mercy for those who return to him. Isaiah named the child's coming not with guesswork, but with heavenly insight. He wasn't describing folklore. He was outlining the future. This future child would wear names like armor, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Each title reflected what Ahaz lacked, but what the world would one day gain. Where rulers stumbled in fear, this child would reign in wisdom. His rule would be different, not built on domination, but established with justice. The contrast was staggering. While Judah flailed in panic, God whispered promises anchored in eternity. This king would not need armies. His government would bring no tyranny, only restoration. Isaiah foresaw more than just political deliverance. He envisioned spiritual renewal flowing from divine leadership. Through poetry and prophecy, he exposed the emptiness of earthly thrones, and with every word he directed hearts towards something unshakable. Ahaz feared invasion, but ignored the invitation to trust. In doing so, he missed the real miracle in motion. The sign God offered wasn't just about deliverance from conflict, it was about transformation through incarnation. By ignoring that sign, Ahaz stepped out of alignment with heaven's rhythm, and Judah would pay the cost in years to come. Yet Isaiah's prophecies did not end in despair. They pointed forward to the arrival of one who would never disappoint. Even when nations trembled and kings failed, God's promises stood unbroken. The virgin would conceive and the world would change forever. The warnings were real, but so was the wonder. Judgment and joy walked side by side in Isaiah's message. He spoke truth not to please rulers but to honor the Lord, and through his obedience a light began to dawn in the shadows of fear. A future ruler was foretold not with swords and shields but with poetry and purpose. Isaiah's vision stretched beyond the crisis of his century, into an age when peace would no longer be theory. From humble origins would emerge a liberator whose authority defied tradition. This leader's credentials would not be written in bloodshed but carved into eternity. To those stumbling in chaos, a luminous breakthrough was prophesied. The land shrouded in fear would soon host a great illumination. This light was not from stars but from the arrival of a child with divine essence, a son given yet eternal, a paradox only heaven could craft. The weight of governance would not oppress but uplift. This ruler would be known not by lineage alone but by names full of eternal significance. Extraordinary counselor hinted at wisdom unmatched. Divine warrior echoed the strength that needs no sword. Forever Father described continuity beyond decay. Peace Architect revealed his ultimate mission, not merely to end wars, but to restore hearts. This was not fantasy, it was forecast. Isaiah announced it centuries ahead, unveiling heaven's plan with startling precision. Unlike mortal kings, his authority would grow without collapse. Justice would roll out like waters, and equity would endure through generations. But Isaiah offered more than throne room imagery. He described not only the glory, but also the grief that would surround this coming one. From the family tree of Jesse, a new branch would sprout. The root long thought lifeless would bear life again. This new leader would carry a sevenfold spiritual anointing: insight, power, reverence, discernment, inner strength, divine knowledge and holy awe. Each gift tailored not for tyranny, but for trustworthy rule. He would judge without prejudice, seeing not just appearances but motives. The meek would finally find an advocate who would not ignore their cries. Wickedness would not go unchallenged. Righteousness would be his robe, and faithfulness his unshakable belt. Creatures long opposed, wolf and lamb, leopard and goat, would lie together in safety. Even the child would play near danger, and it would do no harm. This kingdom would reverse the curse, undoing ages of hostility and fear, and the knowledge of God would saturate the earth like water covers the sea. But then Isaiah pivoted. The tone grew hushed, reverent, aching. He described another servant, this time not a king in robes, but a figure marked by sorrow. The contrast between majesty and misery was intentional. This servant was chosen, upheld, filled with God's Spirit, not to dominate but to restore. He would not raise his voice in self-promotion, nor break the bruised. His gentleness would not be weakness, but restraint of unmatched strength. He would mend what others discarded and breathe justice into broken systems. This Redeemer would be light for distant nations. His mission would liberate, not through power but through presence. Yet this servant would face brutal opposition. Rejection wouldn't come from strangers, but from the very ones he came to redeem. He would be beaten, insulted, and disfigured. Still, he would not retaliate nor run. Instead of rising with vengeance, he would kneel under the weight of suffering. His silence would thunder louder than protest. This servant would offer his back to the whip and his face to shame. He would accept humiliation so others could be healed. Isaiah declared, "He bore our griefs, he carried our pain." Though accused of wrongdoing, he carried none. His wounds were not earned, they were inherited from us. He endured what we deserved. Peace was achieved through his bruising. Each of us, like wayward sheep, wandered in self-direction, but upon him was placed the weight of all our errors. Silent as a lamb before the blade, he neither pleaded nor explained. He absorbed injustice without abandoning the mission. No deceit came from his mouth, no sin was found in his path. And yet he was crushed, not by man's hatred alone, but by divine permission, for in his suffering a deeper plan unfolded. Through this anguish many would find pardon. His pain purchased their restoration. He would see the fruit of his agony and be satisfied, not with revenge but with reconciliation. This servant's reward was not applause but adoption of the lost. His inheritance was the transformed. Isaiah called this servant righteous. Through him, multitudes would be declared guiltless. He would carry their offenses, stand in their place, and mediate between man and God. His prayer would rise on behalf of rebels. This portrait was not coincidence, it was blueprint. The servant Isaiah described would later walk the roads of Galilee and climb the hill of Calvary. Though Isaiah never mentioned a name, his prophecy echoed unmistakably in one man's life. Every bruise, every cry, every silence mirrored what the prophet foresaw. The promised child and the suffering servant were not two people, but two dimensions of the same Redeemer, royal and rejected, exalted and executed. Through Isaiah, God unveiled a future most would dismiss. Who would believe such a tale, that power would come through pain? But the prophet's words refused to fade. Century after century, they waited for fulfillment. When that child was finally born, his arrival was marked by angels, yet received by shepherds. When that servant finally suffered, the earth shook in recognition. Isaiah showed that salvation wouldn't come through force, it would come through sacrifice. No army marched behind this Messiah, yet kings would one day kneel before him. No wealth decorated his crib, yet heaven had invested everything in his coming. This servant king redefined authority. He ruled not from fear but from love poured out in full. Isaiah's vision challenged expectations. God would not rescue from above, but enter into suffering below. His greatness would not be measured in palaces but in pierced hands, and his legacy would not end at death, it would conquer it. To this day, Isaiah's words open eyes. His message whispers to hearts still aching for redemption. The throne he saw still stands. The servant he described still saves. While the sun still rose over Jerusalem, shadows of betrayal grew across its leadership. The people had access to truth yet clung to illusion. The prophet warned of encroaching ruin, but his voice was often drowned by applause for compromise. Idolatry had replaced intimacy with God. Judah looked outward for defense, but inward decay had already begun. Their treaties with foreign nations exposed a deeper disloyalty. God sent Isaiah to sound the alarm before collapse became irreversible. The prophet's words cut through ceremonial appearances, striking at spiritual rock. The nation built walls of stone, but their true fortifications were eroding. Security had become a performance rather than a conviction. Judgment wasn't spontaneous, it was the consequence of repeated rejection. Warnings had been plentiful, but repentance remained rare. Isaiah exposed the vanity of superficial worship. Sacrifices filled the temple, but justice vanished from the streets. The people fasted but ignored the hungry. They honored the Sabbath while exploiting their workers. God's patience had a limit, not out of cruelty but righteousness. His discipline would cleanse what defiance had corrupted. Assyria came first as an ally but transformed into an iron fist. The empire that Judah invited now came with chains. Jerusalem's political games backfired, turning friends into tyrants. The throne's pride became the city's downfall. Yet in the midst of national panic, Isaiah still clung to divine consistency. Destruction would be severe but never total. Even in the harshest decrees, mercy lingered. A portion would survive, not by merit but by God's commitment to his promise. This faithful fraction, the remnant, would carry the seed of renewal. Though scattered, they would not be lost. Isaiah's message carried more than mourning. It offered a future sown in obedience. The remnant was not elite, but entrusted. They were witnesses through whom hope would re-emerge. While cities crumbled and temples burned, faith would flicker in a few. Their resilience was not political, but spiritual. God would preserve those whose hearts remained aligned. Their loyalty outlived their buildings. Isaiah also foretold Judah's prideful encounter with Babylon. What began as courtesy soon revealed fatal vanity. Hezekiah welcomed envoys from the east, displaying his treasures without restraint. What seemed like diplomacy became an invitation to conquest. Isaiah questioned the king with startling clarity. What did they see, and why did you show them? The prophet then issued a prophecy that echoed like a warning shot through time. Everything revealed would eventually be removed. Not only gold, but generations would be carried off. The royal line would suffer under foreign dominance. Hezekiah's response revealed a troubling relief. He was content with peace in his own lifetime, ignoring the storm ahead. Self-preservation silenced long-term wisdom. The consequences would fall on descendants he failed to protect. This forecast was not exaggerated fear, it was divine insight. And in time, Babylon would do exactly as Isaiah declared. The nation would be stripped of land, king and sanctuary. Their exile would not be a mere relocation but a theological earthquake. When the day came and Babylon's grip tightened, Isaiah's scrolls were no longer abstract. His words became survival songs. The remnant, remembering his voice, held on to those earlier prophecies. Comfort, restoration, and return had all been promised. God had already named the man who would break Babylon's grip, Cyrus, a ruler who hadn't yet been born. This was not political forecasting, it was divine authorship. The Lord declared that Cyrus would serve his purpose, though unaware. Foreign hands would fulfill holy plans. This proved one crucial truth. Even in judgment, God remains sovereign. Exile didn't dethrone him, it revealed his control over history. Isaiah never softened the pain of coming calamity, but he consistently framed it within God's faithfulness. The prophet taught that losing everything didn't mean losing access to God. The sacred wasn't locked in buildings but carried in obedience. Through fire and captivity, the remnant would emerge refined, and from their survival would come the pathway to redemption. No empire could silence the voice of God's plan. Nations rose and fell, but his word endured every throne's collapse. Isaiah didn't just document failure, he charted the return. Every exile would someday see the gates reopen. Judgment was real, but it wasn't the finale. The remnant would rise not by force but by grace. After judgment had spoken and exile had run its course, a new tone emerged from Isaiah's voice. It was not a shout of warning but an invitation whispered in grace. "Come, all who thirst," he declared, reaching beyond borders, beyond qualifications. No payment required, no status needed. The prophet opened heaven's marketplace where wine and milk flowed without cost. Those empty-handed were the first to be welcomed. This was not about physical hunger alone, but soul famine. It addressed the ache no feast could cure. Isaiah urged listeners to incline their ear, not merely to hear, but to live. God's words were not just commands, they were sustenance. The call was simple: seek while access remained. Procrastination would risk a door closing. He told the wicked to abandon their ways, and the twisted to let go of warped thoughts. Mercy awaited the one who returned, lavish, undeserved, overflowing. Divine pardon wasn't reluctant, it was eager, extravagant, abundant. Isaiah revealed a truth. God's perspective towers above humanity's. His intentions travel a path no man could construct. Rain does not fall in vain, and neither does his word. Once spoken, it fulfills its assignment without failure. Rejoicing would replace mourning. Peace would escort those who responded. Even nature would erupt in celebration. Trees would clap, mountains would dance, and thorns would yield to cypress. This was restoration on a cosmic scale, not a patchwork repair, but total renewal. Yet transformation was not limited to creation. Worship itself would be redefined. God declared that his house would include all peoples, not just one nation. Foreigners who held fast to him would be counted as family. No longer would worship be confined to walls or names. It would rise from lives aligned with his character. Isaiah exposed the hollowness of ritual without righteousness. He confronted fasting that ignored justice and prayer void of compassion. True devotion loosened injustice and fed the hungry. It sheltered the forgotten and lifted the voiceless. God sought more than bowed heads. He wanted restored relationships. He cared more about broken chains than burnt offerings. Isaiah cast a vision of rest not found in calendars but in character. Sabbath became a lifestyle, not just a schedule. Then came the crescendo, the promise of a transformed reality. Behold, I create new heavens and a new earth. What once brought sorrow would no longer be remembered. Tears, pain, and death would lose their sting. Jerusalem would be rebuilt, not just in structure but in spirit. Joy would echo in its streets and laughter would no longer fade. No infant would die prematurely. The elderly would live full and fulfilled. People would cultivate land and enjoy its harvest. Labor would no longer be stolen by invaders. Children would grow without fear of futility. Generational blessing would replace generational trauma. Even predators would be rewired by peace. Wolf and lamb would share pasture. Predator and prey reconciled. Violence would vanish from sacred spaces. On God's mountain, only harmony would remain. The Lord's presence would be continuous, not seasonal. From month to month and Sabbath to Sabbath, people would gather without compulsion. Worship would rise from gratitude, not guilt. Every tongue and tribe would join in unified reverence. This was not merely a dream, it was destiny, a finale already scripted by the author of all things. And in this final chapter, God spoke one more word: invitation. The gates remained open for any who would respond. Isaiah had seen judgment, but he ended with restoration. The God who warned was the same one who welcomed. No sin disqualified the repentant, no past outweighed the promise of pardon. Even those who had strayed furthest could turn and be embraced. Grace extended further than guilt ever could reach. The call still stands: return, receive, rejoice. The well is full, the table is set, and the voice still says, come. If this journey through Isaiah opened your eyes to more than history, if it stirred something deeper, don't leave it here. Tap subscribe to keep walking through timeless truth, and share this with someone whose soul needs a wake-up call today.